Okay, we're ready to go now. But I'm going to apologize to you all from the very beginning because generally I will take my cap off. But if you all will allow me to keep my cap on, I appreciate it. I'm keeping it on because the person that usually come over in the morning and kind of gushes up my hair for me did not, and it's raggedy. But I have something prideful to cover it up, and that is the fact that I served in the military service for our country. So since we're here to talk about Asheville, let's get into it. I'm going to go back as far as I possibly can and try to remember and recall life in Asheville as I know it. And if I'm going all the way back as far as I possibly can, that's almost as long as Asheville has been in existence, which means I've got to go way back. But let's get into it. Asheville, North Carolina, as I know it, has been a city that is a little different from a lot of cities in the South. There is something about maybe the climate that caused Asheville to be a little different. I know many of you all have read, and you've probably seen on TV, various stories over the years about how people lived in particular the South, varied communities, in particular black people. Well, what I can remember and what I experienced, Asheville being a little different. It wasn't as dogged as some of the southern cities. We didn't have the roughness from white people against black people like many cities did. In Asheville, North Carolina, we found a happy medium, some kind of way, as dire as conditions were for black folk. But we found a way to live together in harmony under unequal circumstances until such time as we, the black folk, decided that, whoa, we got to move on up. And we started moving on up. Let's talk about some specific areas. Let's just talk about what we generally are concerned about, even at this day and time. Let's take a look at law enforcement in Asheville, North Carolina. These last 40 years has been extremely difficult in our cities. Asheville has sort of been mediocre. But if we take a look back to 1947, when black people decided that, whoa, hold it just a moment, we've got all white police officers and we don't have any black officers. The voices were raised, and Asheville have enough white Asheville have enough understanding to say, we've got to do something about this. So what has happened in Asheville was the powers downtown and those black folk who were involved went to Stevens Lee High School and chose Mr. Delaney Horn, who was the physical ed teacher, brought him out of the school system because he was college educated. Our freshmen had to be college educated, even though we know for a fact many of the white officers only had a high school education. And there were some that didn't have a high school education. But we had to start off with the top. College educated Mr. Horn. Mr. Horn was brought onto the police department with instructions, after brief training, never to arrest a white person if they venture into his area. His area was Eagle and Market Street. That's where the first black officer was placed. He was given also instructions with no pistol, but what is called a billy club, handcuffs, and a badge, and of course the shirt and pants that matched, uniform, I'm sorry. Mr. Horn, an educated black man, know how to follow instructions, and he followed them to the letter. There were times when folk were down on Lexington Avenue and they'd get a little bit too much to imbibe a little too much. And they would come down Biltmore Avenue and venture onto Eagle Street. Those were white people. It didn't happen often, but it did happen. Mr. Horn, going by his instructions, when this kind of a situation arose, he went to the individuals, spoke to them very nicely. I was there. Spoke to them very nicely and asked them very nicely to leave. If they resisted, Mr. Horn very politely, and this became one of his walking trademarks, very politely, got the gentleman, turned him around. If he had a belt on, stick his hands in his belt. The police department is located exactly where it is now. The jail, exactly where it is now. And he would politely walk him down Eagle Street, up Market to the police officer, and they would be jacked up. You know what jacked up means? That means you're tippy-toeing. You know, he's got you up and you're tippy-toeing. All the way to the police department. And anybody else, this is what happened. Naturally, Mr. Horn was on the force for about 9 months before they brought Mr. Gilbert Sly, another black person, and he became a police. Finally, they gave them a pistol. But the beat was Eagle and Market. If there was a call out into the community, a vehicle was driven from the police department to Eagle Street, pick up Mr. Horn or Mr. Delaney, Sly, and take them to wherever the call was, they were called to. That's the way it was handled. It wasn't until, so I'm going to do this in pieces if you don't mind. It wasn't until over 16 black officers on the police force, hired by the police department, that we were able to afford in our realm of things in law enforcement, elevate a black person to lieutenant in 1990. From 1947 to 1990, all of our black officers served as just police officers, except 3 were sergeants in between time. And we moved on to today. We have a black sheriff. What a tremendous overcome that we experienced coming from almost nothing to the middle where you've got a little something. Today you're at the pinnacle of law enforcement. That's what happened here. Now let's talk a little bit about the civil rights movement. Let's talk about the civil rights movement as we move forward. Let's talk about the civil rights movement when Martin Luther King was out going all over the country, preaching nonviolence and bringing people together and fighting, demonstrating in order to get the attention of those folk who were in position to make the change that was necessary for conditions to be better between white and black folks across the country. In Asheville, North Carolina, if you read the paper or you saw any programs on TV, oh gosh, I'm sorry, you'd have to be old enough. And most of you, I'm looking out here, you were not here, okay. But there are stories about some of the things that happened back then. All over this country, folk were demonstrating for their God-given rights to be treated as humans. There's no difference in here. Most of the cities, south and in the north, there were demonstrations. There were all kinds of chaos all over these cities. There were people so angry until they burned down homes in their own neighborhood. This is an actual fact. In Michigan, there was a block wherein folk were out burning down the house, burned up their own apartments. They were so incited and angry. But we in Asheville were a little different from them. We in Asheville always had sort of a kind of an understanding between black and white. Not always equal, but at least we talked. And it was in 1961 when a group of high school students formed by the name of A-Score. They were under the tutelage of Mr. William Rowland, a black jeweler on Eagle Street. And when these students from Stevens Lee would leave the high school and go to Mr. Rowland's office where they received their instructions, they fanned out across the downtown area of Asheville, and they went in places like Eckerd's Drugstore, Plaza Theater, Paramount Theater. Several restaurants were tried, and incidentally, the restaurants were tried by adults. These students were mostly downtown. And these demonstrations went on for weeks in order to raise the conscience of those folk who were in charge that we want a better way and a better life in downtown Asheville. Dr. Arlene Simmons was one of those persons involved in A-Score. And these were younger people that was taking up this mantle to try to dismantle the unevenness of our society. But it goes further than that. Here is where the brilliance of Asheville's families came in. The brilliance of Asheville educators came into the picture. 1965, 2 busloads of black children were bused to Wilshire Dip on Merriman Avenue. Do you all know anything about Merriman Avenue? There was a A&W restaurant there. And these students were bused there just to get out of the buses and go to A&W to try to be allowed to be fed. They were denied, but they did. These were kids. 1968, the same teachers that brought those students to Wilshire Dip, Merriman Avenue, brought them to Princess Park, downtown. 2 buses. And how did this happen? They were students of Mountain Street School. Ms. Catherine Cunningham was the teacher who organized it. She taught the kids on the school grounds how to calmly demonstrate, walk downtown and demonstrate. I understand that the principal asked Ms. Cunningham and the folk that was, when they were going through these exercises, what was it all about? And they told them that they were getting the kids ready for a field trip. Didn't tell them they were getting ready to go downtown to Princess Park and march. So it took place. 2 buses of kids down to Princess Park, debarked from the buses, and walked from Princess Park down Patton Avenue, across the square, and then down Market Street to the Cultural Center, where I was supposed to speak to them once they arrived. When to observe those kids getting off the bus in Princess Park, observe those kids so orderly, organized, walking down Patton Avenue, across the square, walking down Patton Avenue, and people in the buildings looking out the window at them. they arrived at the Wildlife Cultural Center. And there were some adults on front of what's called the Del Cardo talking, what are those kids doing? They ought to be in school. These were adults and happened to be black. Wow, I don't believe this. I heard it before going in. And I thought about how sinister that was, just a thought to mention it. So I go into the Wildlife Cultural Center, and to be very candid with you all, I don't cry. I can get emotional. But I was so filled up with the way those kids deported and conducted themselves, walking down Patton Avenue, across the square, down Market Street, into the Wildlife Cultural Center, I could not speak. That's how touched I was. But this is the part that our kids played in a demonstration to try to raise the conscious attention that we need a better way for certain people in our community who happen to be black. Let's go to the health care. In Asheville, North Carolina, believe it, you all hear of Mission Hospital? Mission Hospital was over on College Street. And Mission Hospital, back in the 20s and 30s, had a wing called the Colored Wing. And they waited on colored patients. But we also had a group of resilient movers and shakers, black folk, doctors and nurses, and a few civic leaders that came together and decided that we want something a little better than that wing, which hangs out near the interstate. If you're over there, the building's still there in the same way that it was then. And they bought the Colored Hospital, which is located on Biltmore Avenue. It's more formally known today, Jesse Ray's funeral home is in it, but that was the Colored Hospital. That was the Colored Hospital that black folk could say, we did this. And it just so happened that we had a cadre of doctors and nurses trained well enough to manage the hospital so that the same kind of care they've got at Mission, maybe even better, they received at the Colored Hospital. At one time, we had 9 black doctors, 3 dentists in Asheville, servicing the people in need. Today, we don't have as many. That means that we've regressed in that area. Let's do one more. No. Let's do more than one more. Because let me show you all what I brought. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different areas that I'm going to talk about. But I'm going to spare you all the time of staying here listening to me, and I'm just going to do 4. So at this time, I'm going to talk a little bit about business. Oh no, employment first. Employment. Asheville, North Carolina. Employment. Asheville has always prided itself in tourism. As a matter of fact, for many, many years, on up until the 67 and the 70s, Asheville wanted to push travel and tourism. And that's where many of the jobs were back years ago. Oh yes, we had other jobs. We had janitorial services, we had maid services. The only real paying employment was Oteen Hospital. If you had a car, you could get out to Inca. You could go there, be a janitor. These were the major employers. The hospitals always. But these are the major employers. Back in the day, as they say. What the Asheville NAACP, Mr. Lord McCord, we had a group of blacks who formed a community relations. There was another name for it, but that's what it was all about. What they did, they started petitioning the powers that be to bring, now think about this, black folk telling white people they need to change the way that they were going about developing employment from travel and tourism to some type of industry. Yes, we had a little industry. It was down in the River Arts District. We had several plants down there. There were a number of black folks that worked in plants. Then we moved into October, and we always had the tobacco season. You all have heard of the tobacco warehouses? We got a lot of them. It used to be on Valley Street, down in River Arts District, tobacco warehouses. But that was like seasonal employment for black folk. That was one way of affording a different type of employment from maids, janitors, butlers, and chauffeurs. So, what else is it? Business, black businesses. And lo and behold, we looked around the city, and believe it or not, there were 137 black-owned businesses in Asheville, North Carolina, 40 on Eagle and Market, 23 from Biltmore Avenue down to Depot on South Side. The other businesses were spread throughout Asheville, and particularly the black community. And these were not all traditional businesses. Believe it or not, during those years, those early years, black folk owned furniture store, general insurance, a cab line, cab stand as they called it then, located on the corner of South Side, Cox Avenue, wherein a black person ordered 5 brand new Packard automobiles. Number 3, Cadillac Buick Packard. He also had constructed a cement block building on that corner. And he hired 5 white drivers to drive the Packards and dressed them in chauffeur clothing. This is a black person in Asheville, North Carolina, who had the guts and one more thing, money to put it to work. Black-owned cabs, and think about this, you all. One person, 5 brand new Packards, built own building, and station them and white drivers on a cab line in Asheville, North Carolina, followed by Mr. Robert Simpson, who constructed Rabbit's Motel on McDowell. Many of you have heard about it. Many of you probably have gone there to eat. But there was another person who purchased their own building with their own money, brand spanking. You all understand that one? New. For black folk and white people if they wanted to go, because they had 5 motel units. Then we had Mr. Robert Boyd, who up at Southland Drive-In on McDowell, just above Rabbit. Now, let's go back to Eagle Street. Let's go back to the block. Let's go back to Eagle and Market, where you have got 11 restaurants from Biltmore Avenue to Spruce Street. That short block, think about it, black people in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, 11 restaurants. There were some other businesses mixed in, 4 pool rooms. Think about it again, 4 pool rooms in that short block. And one of them was all new equipment purchased by Mr. A.C. Mitchell, who occupied one of the foundry buildings with a pool room on the first floor, second floor indoor skating rink, third floor the Crystal Ballroom. 1960. Eagle Street, Market Street. There's also a shooting gallery on Eagle Street. On Eagle Street is where the General Insurance Company was located. General, listen now. General Insurance Company. I mean home insurance, automobile insurance, and he had life insurance. Mr. Walter Lee, Mrs. Rita Lee, renowned principal of Asheville, North Carolina. It was her son that owned that business. And there were 3 pressing clubs. There was also a theater. And of course, you had the Wyoming Cultural Center there that entertained a number of different cultural activities. And Mr. Forrest Hardy. Mr. Forrest Hardy was the first black person to run for city council in 1948. So in doing business, I got to dip into a little bit of politics. And Mr. Forrest Hardy and Mr. Smith, I'll give you his first name, owned the Your Cab on the Eagle Street. Mr. Forrest Hardy was about 4 feet 5 inches. He also had an ambulatory deficit. But he was a brilliant little man. And if you look down at him and he's talking to you, you'd have to hear him because he hollered loud. But he also knew how to monotone his voice. He decided he wanted to run for city council and filed. The word went out. A Negro has put their name in the pot for city council. So the cab stands located on Biltmore Avenue and Eagle Street. 3 white persons came down, got in Mr. Hardy's cab, and gave a residence on College Street. Think about College Street, from Eagle Street down and up on College Street. What's near College Street? Bowcatcher Mountain. So once they arrived in College Street, the gentleman ordered Mr. Hardy to go further. That means up into the bushes. And once they were up there, they took Mr. Hardy out of his cab, and they did not flog him, but they broke down limbs and beat him. How do I know? Because when Mr. Hardy came back to Eagle Street and started telling the story, that also ended his run for city council. He was the first person in 1948 got out of it. However, that didn't take him out of the business. Let's say one more thing that's so striking about the black person. Many of them, those people who own businesses on Eagle Street and beyond, had what we call today a loan pool, credit union, without a real freestanding office. Every Sunday at 3 o'clock, the black business persons would meet at quick service cafe on Eagle Street. And they would have a meeting about their varied businesses and about the problems and about the good things, and also about the amount of money that they needed. If a business person is there and needed $15, it didn't take a lot of money at that time to operate a business. We need $15, $20. They gave the person in charge their name, the date was written down, the amount of money, and the date it was to be repaid. This is every Sunday at 3 o'clock. How do I know? Because after church, my mother and father used to take the three of us, to Eagle Street, and my father and mother owned a cafe, which was a quick service cafe, and that's where the money was. And we were there, was able to see and hear some things that went on. I guess what I'm getting to here is think about it. Now, this is 1939, 40, 41, 42, and 43, that my parents were in charge of this loan fund and never lost a dime. That's a tremendous way to live among black people under very trying times. Today, if we look around, do we find any black institution that is loaning money? Do we find anyone that's loaning money to business folk? The point that I'm making here is that yesterday we did it. Difficult. We made it work. We've got to do something a little different today. It just isn't happening. Now, let's talk about a real, everything is real, but let's talk about something very unusual. Are you all aware of the fact that the first manufacturing company owned by black people in America was started here? Yes. Really? Wow. Yes. Well, thank you. Many of you have seen and saw Weezy and George Jefferson. When you see them on Sunday nights, always the song was "Moving On Up." Well, we moved on up here in Asheville, North Carolina. This is not a brag, it is a fact. And it's one that has beamed across the country. It is one that, in my travel, I've met it a number of times. But we can claim that in Asheville, North Carolina, in spite of difficult conditions, that we were able to move within those difficult conditions and bring about something that no other community in America was able to do. AFRAM Incorporated is that mantelpiece for us. And again, I want you all to understand this, please. I'm not saying it because I was the one. But I want you all to know I'm one of you all that made it happen. And I was taught Mrs. Sadie Moore in the 7th, 8th grade. She used to tell us, when you do things, don't say I. Don't say I so much. And I do my best to stay the heck away from it. But once in a while, you have to say, I did it. And what I did reflects on everybody in here, in particular those of you who might be over 50. And I'm not asking you to tell your age, but I'm saying, because what I did, whatever, anytime, is for everybody else, including white people. Because by bringing about that manufacturing company, it brought about 88 jobs, different from janitorial, maid, and butlers. It also brought about 16 people that bought their first home while working at Avery Incorporated. 11 people bought their first car while working there. The organization brought in over $6 million outside money. That's a difference from money being generated within the community. This, what we're talking about, I'm not going to say I did that now, because it's somebody else's money coming in. But the most important thing, being able to generate that type of enterprise amongst people who were denied an opportunity for all of the resources that's necessary to start a business, but found a way to make it happen. Okay, now, Asheville, 1970. Asheville decided that it wanted to become an all-American city. It looked around and said, okay, what have we done to deserve all-American city? Well, they looked at the Opportunity Corporation. The Opportunity Corporation that came here in 1968, it came here in order to work in neighborhoods and assist black people in learning how to become more resilient and work within a framework which was never experienced before, and that's integration that's now coming in. It looked around. Oh, Asheville had paid off its debt that was incurred back in the 20s. It paid off the debt. Okay, that's another one. Look around. What else has happened? There was an organization called Neighborhood Youth Corps. That was an organization that was brought here. These organizations, you have to apply to Washington in order to get them. Many communities don't have them because they don't apply for them, but actually we did. We also applied for model cities as well. But when they looked at those parts, they said, okay, we're going to try to become an all-American city. And the business folks discussed it. The political folks discussed it. Then they found out, said, well, that's not strong enough. Those are accomplishments that we made, but it's not strong enough. They said, oh, wait a minute. Avery Incorporated is what we need to include in the package. The package was put together, sent in to Philadelphia, evaluated. Asheville is invited to receive the honors, and 52 people boarded a charter bus and went to Philadelphia. And while in Philadelphia, it was pre-planned, pre-organized, and pre-practiced that a certain person was going to make that presentation. And that certain person made the presentation. The judge explained to everybody from the very beginning, if they get excited about something, sit quietly like in a courtroom. No one is to get excited. No one is to get up. Retain your calmness. First was the mayor, Wayne Montgomery, presentation. Next was Finn Horton, who was the city manager at the time. Then the third person, who's the cleanup person. The third person, I saw him. He walked to that mic in that huge hall with several thousand people, and he delivered a presentation that said, never heard before. The assembling of people erupted across that hall. And the judge didn't even try to quieten them down. I felt so good about we've been making some progress in varied areas in human relations at this time, that the person that delivered that doggone message, I heard later, and others heard later, that he sealed the deal for Asheville becoming an all-American city in 1970. And one of these days, I will tell you all who that person was that delivered that message. So we're back in Asheville, North Carolina. So what else can we do? What else do we need to do? We've got an all-American city. We've got some other programs working. What else do we need to do? So we need to develop a more effective human relations office. There was a human relations office started in Asheville in 1965, late model, by city manager Weldon Ware. And it operated from 1965 to 1968. There is a person who observed, studied everything that the human relations did for the 4 years that it was in business, and it was not producing what this person felt it should do for black people and for white people. So this person went to the chamber and to the city council and to the county commissioners and talked to them about redoing the human relations office because we need something more effective, because we need more change brought about for Asheville and North Carolina, black and white community, to create a better feeling among each other, a better working together among each other, a better understanding of each other. And the design program was given to those folk. They studied it. And in September of 1969, just after the first uprising in Asheville, North Carolina, at Asheville High. Asheville had never had an uprising like when those students went to Asheville High after being told, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. They knew that the police were going to be stationed at Asheville High the next day because it was telegraphed. There were some unsettled folk, with some unsettled issues, moving from Stevens Lee and combining the two schools, moving the trophies, all the awards from Stevens Lee to Asheville High, displaying those in an equal manner. That was kind of out of the realm at that time. So the students were angry. And oh my, what happened was the students went to school, the police were on the outside, and those police say, those students say, we have had enough. We're not going to go with this stuff of not being recognized under the new educational system and the new location. And they acted in accordance with the way they were feeling. They approached the police. They attempted to walk past the police. At that time, you all probably read about it. A lot of students were maimed and beaten during that time. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, black folk and white people had a meeting at the YWCA to talk about what happened at Asheville, the new Asheville High. And believe me, there was some real fireworks at that meeting. But the new Human Relations Office, the city had received the charter to organize in September the 29th, that's when the new Human Relations Office sprung into action, heard the students, and that was the first issue that this new Human Relations Office took up as something they had to resolve. And let me explain something to you. From that day forward, the Human Relations Council of 1969, September, became a real reckoning tool to ameliorate problems in our community. If I tell you each one of the problems that were resolved without any fanfare, resolved without any rude action from people, we'll be here for quite some time. But I'll say this to you. It was an entity that did much to bring about peace and harmony among the people of Asheville. Also, it brought about a much better understanding and tolerance because of the fact when you have an opportunity and willing to sit down and talk more than one time, we will find that there's a lot more we agree on than we disagree. And the only thing we have to do is allow ourselves to believe in ourselves and talk to each other. Give each other an opportunity to know each other. And it's so easy for us to be a better people among ourselves. Asheville has a way to go, but we've done a great job of getting where we are today. I will not talk about urban renewal and others at this time. Thank you very much.
So you see why we had to have Mr. Bacoate as part of our Juneteenth celebration, because Juneteenth is not just about celebrating, but it's about remembering and honoring the legacy of those that struggled before us. And we know a lot of times we talk about Juneteenth being when enslaved people were found out, particularly in Texas, 2.5 years later, after the Emancipation Proclamation, that they were free. But it was not all celebration. As I mentioned in yesterday's luncheon, when slave owners realized what was going on, they started beating people, they started killing people. We know that throughout Buncombe County, we had 3 individuals lynched due to racial violence. And so let's not just celebrate, during Juneteenth, but let's remember those who have come before us, whose shoulders we stand on. So again, I want to thank you for coming out today. I want to thank Mr. Bacoate. He is just a wealth of knowledge and information. If you don't know him, get to know him. I don't know him well. We both serve on the African American Heritage Trail Committee, and that's when I really got to know him. I know his son, and just the wealth of knowledge that he shares on that committee around history and infamous people that contributed to Asheville. It's just unbelievable. So thank you again. Have a good day.